Lemon. By Motojiro Kajii. An uncanny and ominous lump had been constantly weighing on my mind. Should I call it irritation, or perhaps aversion? Just as a hangover follows a drinking bout, when you drink every day, a period arrives that corresponds to a hangover. That's what had come. This was a bit unbearable. It wasn't the resulting apical catarrh or nervous breakdown that was unbearable, nor was it the scorching debt that was unbearable. What was unbearable was that ominous lump. Any beautiful music that had once delighted me, any beautiful line of poetry, became intolerable. Even when I went out of my way to listen to a gramophone, I would suddenly want to get up after the first few bars. Something made me restless. And so I was constantly wandering from street to street. For some reason, I remember being strongly drawn to shabby and beautiful things at that time. Even in the scenery, I preferred dilapidated towns, and even in those towns, I preferred back alleys with a certain familiarity, where dirty laundry was hung out to dry, where junk was lying around, and where grimy rooms could be glimpsed, rather than the aloof main streets. A town with the charm of being eroded by rain and wind and eventually returning to the earth, where mud walls were crumbling and rows of houses were tilting. Only the plants were thriving, and sometimes there were surprisingly vibrant sunflowers or cannas in bloom. Sometimes, as I walked along such streets, I would suddenly try to create the illusion that I was not in Kyoto, but hundreds of miles away in Sendai or Nagasaki, that I was in such a city now. If I could, I wanted to escape from Kyoto and go to a city where I didn't know a single soul. First of all, rest. A single room in a deserted inn. Clean bedding. A fragrant mosquito net and a well-starched yukata. There, I wanted to lie down for a month without thinking about anything. If only this place could somehow become that city. When the illusion finally began to succeed, I would then apply imaginary paint to it. It was nothing more than a double exposure of my illusion and the dilapidated town. And I enjoyed losing myself in it. I also grew fond of those things called fireworks. The fireworks themselves were secondary, but what fascinated me were the bundles of fireworks with various stripes of red, purple, yellow, and blue in cheap paint, the starfall of Nakayama Temple, the flower battles, and the burnt-out bamboo tubes. Then there were the mouse fireworks, each one shaped like a ring and packed in a box. Such things strangely enticed me. Then again, I grew fond of the small glass beads called biyodoro, with their embossed designs of sea bream and flowers, and I grew fond of the Nanjing toma, a kind of toy. And to lick them was an indescribable pleasure for me. Was there any flavor as faint and cool as the taste of that biyodoro? When I was a child, I often put them in my mouth and was scolded by my parents, but was it because those sweet childhood memories were revived in me, now grown up and dejected? Indeed, that taste had a faint, refreshing, somehow poetic and beautiful flavor to it. You may have guessed, but I had no money at all. That being said, in order to comfort myself when I was even slightly moved by the sight of such things, I needed extravagance. Things that cost 2 or 3 sen, extravagant things. That is, beautiful things, things that rather appealed to my listless senses. Such things naturally comforted me. The places I used to like before my life was eroded, for example, were places like Maruzen. Red and yellow eau de cologne and eau de quinine. Stylish cut glasswork and elegant Rococo-style perfume bottles in amber and emerald green with embossed patterns. Pipes, pocket knives, soap, cigarettes. I would sometimes spend a whole hour looking at such things. And in the end, I would indulge in the extravagance of buying a single, top-quality pencil. But even this place was now nothing more than a burdensome place for me. Books, students, the cashier's counter, all of them seemed to me like the ghosts of debt collectors. One morning, at that time, I was living by moving from one friend's lodging to another, from friend A to friend B. I was left alone in the empty air after my friend had gone to school. I had to wander out again from there. Something was chasing me away. And from street to street, I walked through the back alleys I mentioned earlier, stopped in front of candy stores, gazed at the dried shrimp, dried cod, and yuba in dried food stores, and finally I went down Teramachi Street towards Niho, where I stopped at a fruit store. I would like to introduce this fruit store here for a moment, but it was my favorite store among those I knew. It was by no means a splendid store, but the beauty peculiar to fruit stores was most blatantly felt there. The fruits were arranged on a rather steep stand, and the stand itself seemed to be made of old, black lacquered boards. Like the rapid allegro movement of some brilliant and beautiful music, confronted with the Gorgon's mask that turns onlookers to stone, the fruits were arranged, frozen in such colors and such volume. The vegetables were also piled high as you went further back. Indeed, the beauty of the carrot leaves there was splendid. Then there were the beans and the arrowheads soaking in water. Another beautiful thing about that house was the night. Teramachi Street was generally a bustling street, though the feeling was much clearer than in Tokyo or Osaka, and the lights from the display windows flowed out abundantly onto the street. For some reason, only the area around that storefront was strangely dark. Since one side was originally a corner facing the dark Niho Street, it was natural that it was dark, but it was unclear why the neighboring house was also dark despite being on Teramachi Street. However, if that house had not been dark, I don't think it would have been so tempting to me. Another thing was the eaves of that house, which were like the brim of a deeply crowned hat. This is not so much a metaphor as it is to say that the eaves were so low that they made you think, oh, that store has its hat brim pulled down awfully low, so the top of the eaves was also pitch black. Because the surroundings were so dark, the splendor of the several electric lights that were lit at the storefront, showering down like a sudden rain, was not robbed by anything around it, and a beautiful view was illuminated as it pleased. Standing on the street where the naked electric lights pierced my eyes like thin spiral rods, and looking through the glass window on the second floor of the nearby locksmith's shop, the view of this fruit store was rarely as exciting to me as it was then. Even among the sights of Teramachi that day, I did some shopping at that store, more than usual. That was because they had some unusual lemons. Lemons are quite common. But since that store was nothing more than an ordinary greengrocer, though not shabby, I hadn't seen them much before. I do like those lemons. That simple color, like lemon yellow paint squeezed out of a tube and solidified, and that short, stubby, spindle-like shape. In the end, I decided to buy just one. Where and how did I walk after that? I walked the streets for a long time. The ominous lump that had been constantly weighing on my mind seemed to have loosened somewhat from the moment I grasped it, and I was very happy on the streets. The melancholy that had been so persistent was dispelled by a single fruit of such a thing. Or perhaps what was suspicious was, paradoxically, true. Even so, what an S per thousand A with circumflex V? Ething the mind is, the coldness of that lemon was indescribably good. At that time, I had a bad apical lung and always had a fever. In fact, I would try shaking hands with any of my friends to show off my fever, and my palm was hotter than anyone else's. Perhaps it was because of that heat that the coldness, which seemed to permeate my body from the palm of my hand, was pleasant. I brought the fruit to my nose and smelled it again and again. California, where it was said to have been produced, came to my mind. The words striking the nose, which I had learned in classical Chinese from the words of the tangerine seller, came to mind in fragments. And when I inhaled the fragrant air deeply into my chest, a warm flush of blood rose to my body and face, which had never breathed deeply before, and I felt a kind of vitality awaken within me. Indeed, I find it strange how such simple sensations of cold, touch, smell, and sight suited me so well, as if I had been searching for nothing but this for a long time. But that was then that I was already bouncing with light excitement on the street, feeling a kind of pride, imagining a poet in aesthetic attire strolling through the streets, and I was walking. I would place it on a dirty towel or hold it up to my cloak to measure the reflection of the color, and I would think things like this. This is the weight, then. That weight was what I had always been searching for, and I would think, with a conceited sense of humor, that this weight was undoubtedly the weight of all good things, all beautiful things, converted into weight. Anyway, I was happy. Where and how did I walk? The last place I stood was in front of Maruzen. Maruzen, which I usually avoided so much, seemed easy to enter at that time. I'll go in for a bit today. And I went straight in, but what was this? The happy feeling that had filled my heart gradually fled. My heart did not settle on the perfume bottles or the pipes. Gloominess was closing in. I thought the fatigue of walking around had caught up with me. I went to the shelves of art books. Even taking out the heavy art books seemed to require more strength than usual, I thought. But I took out each book one by one, and opened it, but the feeling of meticulously turning the pages did not well up. Moreover, as if cursed, I would pull out the next book. It was the same with that one. And yet, I couldn't be satisfied without flipping through it once. Unable to bear it any longer, I would leave it there. I couldn't even put it back in its original position. I repeated this many times. In the end, I even left the heavy, orange-colored Ingress book, which I had always loved, because it was even more unbearable. What a curse! Fatigue remained in the muscles of my hands. I became gloomy and stared at the pile of books I had pulled out and left stacked. What had happened to the art books that had once attracted me so much? I used to enjoy that strangely incongruous feeling after I had finished exposing my eyes to each page and then looked around at the all-too-ordinary surroundings. Ah, that's right, that's right. At that moment, I remembered the lemon in my pocket. I would try it out with this lemon once, after piling up the colors of the books in a jumble. That's it. The light excitement from before returned to me. I piled them up at random, crushed them in a hurry, and built them up again in a hurry. I pulled out new ones and added them, and took some away. A strange, fantastical castle, each time turning red or blue. Finally, it was finished. And while suppressing my lightly leaping heart, I fearfully placed the lemon on the top of the ramparts. And it was a masterpiece. Looking around, the color of the lemon had quietly absorbed the gaudy gradation of colors into its spindle-shaped body, and it was shining brightly. I felt as if the dusty air in Maruzen was strangely tense only around that lemon. I gazed at it for a while. Suddenly, a second idea occurred to me. That strange scheme rather startled me. I'll leave it as it is and walk out as if nothing happened. I felt strangely ticklish. Shall I go out? Yes, let's go out. And I went out briskly. A strangely ticklish feeling made me smile on the street. What fun it would be if I were the strange villain who had planted a terrifying bomb, shining golden, on the shelves of Maruzen, and if Maruzen were to explode in 10 minutes, centered on the art shelves. I eagerly pursued this fantasy. Then that stuffy Maruzen would be blown to smithereens. And I went down Kyogoku, where the movie posters were coloring the streets with a strange charm.